Zombie fiction is everywhere these days. Books, comics, video games, movies, television shows, and more. Ask your average Joe on the street, and they'll tell you it all started with George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. But if you ask George Romero, he'll tell you it goes back a little bit further. In 1954, when most science fiction authors were obsessed with the nuclear bomb, an up-and-coming writer named Richard Matheson, not yet 30 years old, published the novel I Am Legend, in which the apocalypse is caused not by atomic warfare but by a biological agent. The novel was a modest hit, helping to launch not only the career of a science fiction legend, but also the zombie craze that still abounds today. Two years after nuclear war and a vicious biological agent have killed nearly the entire human population, Robert Neville lives alone in his penthouse apartment in Los Angeles, slowly losing his grip on reality as he struggles to survive the nightly attacks from a group of mutant zealots called the Family. Eventually, though, he loses the battle, and just as the Family prepares to execute him for the crime of surviving the apocalypse, Neville is rescued by another group of survivors. With their help, Neville concocts a cure to the plague that has ravaged mankind, but the Family is determined to finish their punishment and destroy all hope for everyone. Before we go any further, if you could hit that like button, we might stave off the end of the world just a little bit longer. If you really do like this video, don't forget to subscribe as well. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. In 1958, the British B-movie studio Hammer Film Productions was rising in popularity following the success of horror films like The Quatermass Experiment and The Curse of Frankenstein.
We've only just started, just opened the door. Look, now's the time to go through that door and find what lies beyond it.
After purchasing the rights from American producer Robert Lippert, with whom the company had a good working relationship, they began work on an adaptation of I Am Legend called The Night Creatures. Richard Matheson himself penned the screenplay, but British censors, a perpetual thorn in the side of Hammer Films, rejected Matheson's script outright for its profanity and violence. Around the same time, Robert Lippert was looking to make a Last Man on Earth style film based on the novel Earth Abides by George R. Stewart. However, plans to make Earth Abides fell through after the release of The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, a similar post-apocalyptic movie that bombed at the box office. Lippert then happily purchased the rights for I Am Legend back from Hammer and began producing a new adaptation, titled The Last Man on Earth. Matheson again wrote the screenplay, and the original plan was to have Fritz Lang direct. However, the film eventually went to the workhorse director Sidney Salko, and was given a woefully low budget. Despite an earnest performance from screen legend Vincent Price and a screenplay that sticks relatively close to the original novel, The Last Man on Earth is a fairly unremarkable bit of genre fare that is largely forgotten today.
You freaks! All of you. All of you freaks!
A few years later, the actor Charlton Heston read I Am Legend on a plane trip and was interested in turning it into a movie, unaware that there had already been a previous adaptation. He turned to his friend, the producer Walter Seltzer, with whom he had made The Warlord and Will Penny, and with the rights easily secured, they decided to tackle the film as a parable about overpopulation called The Omega Man. To write the screenplay, they hired the poet and novelist John William Corrington and his wife, Joyce Corrington. The pair had just finished a screenplay for Roger Corman's Von Richthofen Brown. Joyce Corrington was a doctor of chemistry who taught at a black university, which gave her the inspirations to turn the apocalyptic disease into a product of germ warfare, and to turn the female lead into an African American who embraces the then popular Black Power movement. Heston approached Orson Welles at one point to direct, but the director's chair ultimately went to the Ukrainian American Boris Sagal, who did mostly television work. Though he would continue being a fairly prolific television director, he's only really well known today for The Omega Man, and for tragically dying in a horrible accident involving a helicopter blade and partial decapitation. I'm not sure why I have to say this more than once, but really, don't walk into spinning helicopter rotors. The lead role of Robert Neville was always intended to be Heston's, Even though Heston admitted later that he was at a point in his career in which he was getting tired of playing rugged action heroes. Heston did exert a great deal of creative control over the project, seeing as how it was his idea to begin with, but he never quite overstepped his bounds as anything more than its lead performer, allowing Seltzer and Segal to make all the appropriate choices. The female lead, the African-American Lisa, almost went to Diane Carroll or Judy Pace, but the role was eventually given to the unknown Rosalind Cash, who would have a long career in television but who I'll always remember as John Emdahl from Planet 10.
Will everybody please shut up so I can hear the rest of this thing?
Cash was nervous about, quote, screwing Moses, unquote, but she and Heston were both proud of the fact that they shared one of the earliest interracial kisses in Hollywood history. The role of Lisa's younger brother Richie went to an unknown television actor named Eric Launaville in what would become his feature film debut. After The Omega Man, Launaville would continue acting for TV for several years before becoming a very prolific television director. To play the antagonistic Matthias, who can be seen in his pre-disease form as a television anchor, Anthony Zerbe was hired, partially based on Heston's recommendation after working with him on Will Penny. I like Zerbe in some of his subsequent films like License to Kill and Star Trek Insurrection, but I have to admit, he's not very good in this movie. He's too hammy. Matthias' lackey, Zachary, is played a little better by Lincoln Kilpatrick, who would pair up with Seltzer and Heston again in Soylent Green, but although he is better, his performance has a fair bit of cheese in it as well. The Omega Man was filmed in Los Angeles, with a lot of the abandoned cityscapes achieved by simply filming on Sunday mornings and on holidays, although it's not hard to catch the occasional pedestrian or car moving around in the background. A lot of the exteriors were filmed at the Warner Brothers Ranch facilities in Burbank, and most of them are still standing to this day. There was one sequence that may or may not have been filmed that revealed the fact that Lisa is pregnant with Neville's child. While she is wandering the city alone, she comes across an infected family member putting a dead newborn into a crypt, and when she tells this to Neville later, she says she couldn't kill the grieving mother because she was probably going to be one in a few months herself. This sequence sounds pretty powerful, but it was probably cut due to the whole dead baby thing. You can actually see a credit for Woman in Cemetery Crypt, even though one never appears in the final film. One thing that wasn't in the screenplay, however, was this final shot of Neville dying in a Christ pose. There is a religious theme popping up throughout the film that is relatively subtle for most of its runtime.
Like we were starting all over again in the Garden of Eden. Only this time we don't trust no friggin' snake.
But this final shot really hammers it home, making it maybe a little too obvious. It's also not the first time Charlton Heston was involved in a crucifixion scene. The music was done by the Australian composer Ron Grainer, another television veteran who'd worked on The Prisoner and Benny Hill, but who is probably most well known for composing the Doctor Who theme. I'm not going to spend too much time discussing the movie's soundtrack, but suffice to say it's very 1970s.
Hey! Come back!
The Omega Man released in July of 1971 to mixed reviews and a fairly middling $4 million in theater rentals. Despite this, it has managed to maintain a pop culture footprint in the years since, and it has a better-than-cult status, remaining a good example of early 70s science fiction. A third adaptation of Matheson's novel came out in 2007 with Will Smith in the lead, and though it is tempting to compare the three versions, they have surprisingly little in common aside from a very general premise. I personally like this one, The Omega Man, the most, mostly because of Heston's one-liners and the movie's willingness to take risks.
All right, how much you give me in trade for my Ford? Really? Thanks a lot, you cheating bastard.
However, it is so far removed from Matheson's source material that it barely even qualifies as an adaptation. This leans more on the action and on Heston's charisma, which is probably for the better since the movie has a schlocky side to it that isn't helped by its apparently low budget, weak effects work, ridiculous villains, and horribly dated aesthetic. When compared to Heston's other sci-fi movies of the era, it's certainly weaker than Planet of the Apes or Soylent Green, but it's not without its charms. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. Which movie version of I Am Legend do you like the most? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you really do like what I'm doing, consider joining my Patreon to get access to bonus content, get your name in the credits, and more. My patrons get to vote on one movie I cover every single month. You can also check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty more sci-fi classics in both film and literature, including reviews of Matheson's I Am Legend and all 3 of its big-budget adaptations. Until next time, though, when we'll have a whale of a time getting ready for Halloween, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.